And in the last minutes, Andrew Hillier, we're seeing a senior Lebanese official telling the Reuters news agency that Lebanon is pressing for a temporary ceasefire. This as Axios, the U.S. news website, is reporting that direct talks between Israel and Lebanon are due to start next week.
Yeah, a significant development indeed. There was a bit of confusion about exactly when those talks would take place in Pakistan with J.D. Vance, of course, in the American delegation. What we do know now, according to Axios, is that those talks, as you just said, will start next week. Of course, the aim of those talks to bring about some kind of permanent settlement between the two sides. Remember, the ceasefire is only a 2-week ceasefire. It is not a permanent peace settlement. So the aim of those talks, of course...
We're talking about the U.S. and Iran here.
Exactly, the U.S. and Iran.
All right, and that brings us to our Spotlight segment. And it's a pleasure to welcome from Washington Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, former U.S. diplomat. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Pleasure to join you.
Our Jerusalem correspondent stating that if indeed there are direct talks between Israel and Lebanon, that would be a first. How did this suddenly come about?
Actually, slight correction, it wouldn't be a first. The Israelis and Lebanese have had direct talks before this. I think this is largely, frankly, a sop by the Israelis to sort of deflect pressure, that anticipated pressure from President Trump, who has not yet made it clear that if this is in fact the case, that getting Iranian agreement to a 2-week pause, a ceasefire, cessation of hostilities will be dependent or conditional on the Israelis de-escalating, even stopping their military operations in Lebanon. I think the Prime Minister understands what's coming. He cannot afford to alienate Trump, so I think it's a good sign. I think we should keep our expectations very low, particularly if the expectation is that the Lebanese government is somehow going to move against Hezbollah. That's not going to happen. But you could see a de-escalation of the tempo of Israeli kinetic activity, which has been quite severe in the last several weeks, particularly yesterday.
Talk us through, please, what the United States' strategy is. They pick Pakistan as the interlocutor, or Iran does too, by the way. Pakistan's the interlocutor. Pakistan, which has no relations with Israel, thus effectively shutting Benjamin Netanyahu out of this conversation. It's a one-on-one conversation that's due to start. We don't know when exactly, whether it's going to happen tomorrow, Saturday, later. What do you make of the fact that the terms of the ceasefire are fuzzy and the terms of the ceasefire talks are fuzzy?
I think it just reflects the reality of the situation. There's no trust, no confidence between the U.S. and Iran, let alone between Iran and Israel. Second, the Iranians believe they're winning. And by objective standards, that means they're going to hold out and don't feel the same sense of urgency that President Trump feels in terms of trying to find a pathway out of this. The Pakistanis have made it unmistakably clear they are not mediators, they are facilitators. They're providing a venue, and they were responsible in large part because of Pakistan's relationship with key elements within the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. They became a way to indirectly sort of stage what must be ultimately a direct negotiation between Iranian negotiators and U.S. negotiators. You can't do this stuff on the back of a cocktail napkin. You can't do it via a cell phone. And if there are serious negotiations, they're going to have to be direct. But again, we need to keep our expectations extremely low here. We are not talking about a comprehensive arrangement agreement between the U.S. and Iran on all of the issues. At best, we're talking about a temporary cessation of hostilities, maybe a commitment on the part of the United States to provide sanctions relief, and a commitment on the part of Iran, which we have not yet seen, to essentially open the straits. They are now open, but that's preferential access, depending on who or what the Iranians want to get through. So Saturday will be important. I would not be surprised if they got delayed or canceled. There's going to be an extraordinary amount of quote unquote pre-negotiation here in many forms, including pressure, before you actually get to the real thing. Let's hope we get to the real thing.
Yeah, let's talk also about cocktail napkin diplomacy, because Wednesday was such a confusing day for us, and we heard in real time the White House contradict its own claims as to what was in the ceasefire, who was going even. First it was Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, the special advisors, and now it's the U.S. Vice President. What's going on with U.S. diplomacy?
It's a very good question. Look, you have a situation in which the President of the United States has deployed his best friend and his son-in-law to negotiate not just this conflict, three of the most critically important and potentially explosive conflicts going on in the international system today. One between Russia and Ukraine. You know the results of that. A second got off to a good start in Gaza with the 20-point plan, which the president, frankly, pushed through as a consequence of his own leverage with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And then, of course, you have, and that, by the way, those negotiations are hopelessly stuck. And then you have the U.S. and Iran, 4 rounds between Witkoff and the Iranians before the June war, and then a few rounds in Oman, and then Geneva, when in fact the president had already made a decision to go to war. So the vice president's role in this, I'm betting if you did a Google search, you'd find that the Iranians over the last several months have been very unhappy with Misters Witkoff and Kushner. And somehow they believe that the vice president is more risk averse, that the vice president is less enamored of this conflict and able to be a more fair-minded mediator. Whether that proves to be the case or not is unclear. But the fact that the Iranians may have actually had a hand in choosing which Americans they're going to negotiate with, to me, having worked for half a dozen administrations, secretaries of state, that reflects a certain amount, to say the least, a certain amount of dysfunction and chaos in the national security decision-making process of this administration.
Yeah, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, with experience in real estate, not in public diplomacy. How does it work? If J.D. Vance is the man who sits down, who's with him? Who would normally be in the entourage of a U.S. vice president for such important talks? Who would be the person whispering in his ear? How does it work?
You know, it's not without precedent. Vice presidents have negotiated on behalf of their bosses, their presidents before. Joe Biden did it on Iraq. Nixon did it as a sort of envoy with Eisenhower, and there have been other examples. You don't have to be a diplomat. Let's be very clear. The two best negotiators I know on the American side in the last 50 years, I worked for one of them, James Baker. The other, I spent time interviewing, Henry Kissinger. We're not diplomats, but they were smart. They understood that in a negotiation, you have to achieve a balance of interests, that there's something that represents the legitimate needs of the other side. They understood geography. They understood history.
Yeah, but you
don't have to be a State Department diplomat.
I get that, but you talked earlier, Aaron David Miller, about the Iranians doing their homework on the Americans. Does J.D. Vance walk into the room all by himself, or does he have people with him?
He'll have Witkoff and Kushner with him. If you're suggesting that that any of them are going to draw on expertise, on technical teams, it may be that right now that's not what is required. You're going to need a conceptual understanding of what this ceasefire means and what the obligation and terms are of adhering to that. But you will at some point, and this has not happened regularly enough, particularly in Russia and Ukraine, you will at some point have to deploy and include a variety of folks who actually have studied these issues, know the history, know the political culture, and above all, look at an atlas to try to understand and figure out what the advantages and disadvantages of any particular situation is. The fact that either the president was not briefed or he ignored the notion that if in fact you went to war against Iran, they would deploy and mobilize geography as a critical advantage. If no one explained that to him, that their real source of leverage was striking the Gulf on one hand, and then controlling and influencing the Straits of Hormuz on the other, then this was strategic, diplomatic, and presidential malpractice. If we're going to get serious here, and again, that assumes, and this is still a big assumption, that the Iranians are interested in negotiating right now. They're winning. The highly enriched uranium that they possess has not yet been retrieved. The regime has survived. It's now harder line than ever. The instruments of state repression and oppression, to torture, to arrest, to imprison, to repress demonstrations, seems to be working. And now they have newfound influence to demonstrate their control over one of the several most important choke points in the on the planet. So they are not in a hurry. They're not in a hurry.
Yeah, Aaron David Miller, you just mentioned it there. The Iranian regime does appear to have discovered it can survive an onslaught from two of the world's most powerful militaries. How are Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner going to convince the Iranian regime to back down on the likes of the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, I don't think it's a question of convincing them. The real question is, what price is the administration prepared to pay? I mean, it's a sad reality. This is a brutal authoritarian regime that for decades has denied its own people the right of self-determination, freedom, some measure of democratic life and an economic life. But I can't deny the reality. And the reality now is this is a war of choice. If the war stopped tomorrow, it would constitute, in my view, a strategic defeat for the United States. What Trump wants more than anything right now is to get out of this. And the key to getting out of it, in his view, I suspect, is opening up the strait. So the question is not how Witkoff and Kushner and the vice president are going to pressure Iran. Iran, I think, if it's a choice between capitulation and continuing the war, I think the folks that are running that country right now will reluctantly or not choose going back to confrontation and conflict. So the question is, what will the Iranians seek to open those straits, and what is the administration prepared to pay? That's the question. And frankly, the decision on this one rests in the mind of a single person. Not the Secretary of State, not Witkoff, not Kushner, not the Vice President, but Donald Trump. And you remember what he said in the wake of Venezuela. The only constraint that I have exists in the morality of my own mind. If that's the case, then we're going to have to wait to see what the Iranians propose and whether or not the president is prepared in any way, shape, or form to meet those needs and requirements, or if he's prepared, reluctantly or not, to resume this 6-week war.
Before we leave you, Aaron David Miller, things evolving fast as we speak. According to a reporter from Axios, the first meeting between Israel and Lebanon will take place at the State Department in Washington. Your reaction to the fact that now there's, again, suddenly diplomacy between Israel and Lebanon, direct talks?
Again, I would keep my expectations on this very, very low. The current Lebanese government is hostage not only to a fear of civil war and sectarian strife, but they still have to deal with Hezbollah, which, despite Israel's efforts to hollow it out, remains the preeminent military and security actor on the Lebanese scene. The fact that these are taking place at the State Department, I'm not sure I understand that, unless they're literally designed to be performative and symbolic. I mean, who on the Lebanese side is going to represent the government? The prime minister? The president? Probably not. And the Israelis are prepared to probably send any number of individuals. I would be very, very careful and cautious in assessing just how significant these direct talks will be. What needs to be done, I suspect, is the Israelis need to dial back what it is they've been doing in Lebanon, not just with respect to the ceasefire, but it seems to be a policy that they're pursuing, which in the end is going to be a key to an empty room at the considerable expense of the lives of Lebanese civilians. So again, Israel's experience with Lebanon has been unhappy for decades. I understand the problems of Hezbollah rocketing and droning northern Israel. There are thousands of Israelis who have been forced from their homes. But the current Israeli policy is not working. It's not working for Israeli-Lebanese relations. And if it becomes a critical element, a key to moving the ceasefire forward, it's going to exert an even heavier influence.
Aaron David Miller, so many thanks for joining us from Washington.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks as well to Andrew Hillier. Again, we continue to watch this breaking news story. If you're just joining us here on France 24, on what's been a day of national mourning in Lebanon, Israel, which had been engaged in heavy fighting in the south with Hezbollah, announcing through the Prime Minister's office that it was ordering its cabinet to engage in direct talks with the Lebanese government, something that's virtually unprecedented. The talks, according to a reporter from Axios, to take place in Washington, D.C., this on a day when there is a shaky truce right now between Iran and the United States. As you heard Aaron David Miller there state, for ordinary Iranians, for the last 5.5 weeks, things have gotten, if anything, worse. Catherine Viet has more.
More than 175 children and their teachers killed when their school in Minab was struck by a missile on the first day of the war. Since then, Iran says U.S. and Israeli strikes have targeted dozens of universities and research institutions, including Tehran Sharif University of Technology. With a fragile ceasefire in place, many Iranians have been taking stock of the damage done and what the future might hold. Some express concern to France 24's observers that the people will be worse off than before the war began.
This is the worst thing that could have happened. It's really bad. The way this war played out will make the Islamic Republic much more brazen than before. Now they can say that a nation the rest of the world would be afraid to stand up to. The United States, Iran stood up to.
There are fears that the regime will crush the people.
There's this fear that the regime is strong and powerful enough to really harm the people and suppress them as well. I don't think they have the same strength as before. Although there have been arrests, summons, and phone calls during this period, they really can't rebuild themselves if things continue as they are.
At the start of the war, U.S. President Donald Trump promised regime change, but that hasn't happened. Instead, the Islamic Republic has kept up its executions, hanging 14 people, including 7 that were connected to the January anti-government protests, according to the judiciary. It's also imposed an internet blackout that has now lasted 41 days and shows no signs of being lifted.